Warning disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction inspired by emotional and human experiences. All characters, names, and events are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The purpose of this story is to explore deep emotions, healing, and relationships. Reader discretion is advised, as the story contains themes of grief and emotional recovery. I lived in the kind of neighborhood where the mailboxes were identical, lawns were trimmed every Saturday, and people waved at each other without ever really talking. The air always smelled faintly of cut grass and sprinkler mist, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was a garage sale down the street. I liked it that way. After losing my fiancé in a car accident 7 years ago, I found comfort in silence, in routines, in the predictable rhythm of suburban life. I kept my head down, did my work from home, and watered my plants like they were the only conversation I needed. It wasn't that I hated people, I just didn't trust the chaos of emotion anymore. My house was next to Mrs. Carter's. She was a sweet, hard-working woman raising her son, Jacob, on her own after her husband had left a few years back. We'd share polite hellos, an occasional comment about the weather, and sometimes I'd wave to Jacob when he came home from school. He was 16 now, tall, slightly awkward in the way boys that age tend to be, and usually quiet. I always found him respectful, with this gentleness in his eyes that didn't match the usual teenage energy. I never thought much about them beyond what I saw. They had their lives, I had mine. Until one Thursday afternoon. It had just rained. The sidewalks were still wet, reflecting the soft gold of the setting sun. I was coming back from the grocery store when I noticed Jacob sitting on the porch alone, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, looking down like the world had shrunk into his shoes. He didn't notice me right away. I paused, hesitated. It wasn't really my business. But something about his posture, something in the way he wasn't just bored but burdened, made me stop. I called out gently, "Hey, Jacob, everything okay?" He looked up, startled at first, then forced a small smile. "Yeah, I guess." That's when I noticed his eyes were red, subtle, but unmistakably tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from crying. I don't know what possessed me, but I took a step closer and said, "Want some lemonade?" "I made a fresh pitcher this morning." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure." It was a small moment. Nothing grand. Nothing dramatic. But sometimes, change begins exactly like that, with a single invitation, a small act of kindness. We sat on my front steps. The air was cooler now. I handed him the glass, and we sat quietly for a while. Neither of us knew it yet, but that moment would be the start of something neither of us saw coming, something that would bring buried memories to light, and maybe, just maybe, offer a path toward healing we both didn't know we needed. The next time I saw Jacob, it wasn't a planned visit, it wasn't anything special at all. It was 2 days later, a Saturday afternoon, and I was out front pruning the hydrangeas that had started to wilt under the sudden June heat. The sun was strong, the kind that makes you squint even with a hat on, and the air smelled like fresh soil and damp grass. Jacob was walking past with a backpack slung over one shoulder. He gave a small wave, eyes still shadowed by something he hadn't said yet. "Hey," I called out gently. "You heading somewhere?" He stopped. "Just to the park. Needed some air." I nodded and said, "Want to sit for a minute?" I motioned to the bench near my front steps, shaded under the old maple tree. It wasn't an urgent invitation, more like something you say because you feel like someone might need it, even if they don't know they do. To my surprise, he came over. He dropped the bag by his feet and sat beside me, elbows resting on his thighs again like the other day, that same quiet weight hanging off his shoulders. We talked about nothing at first. How the school year was ending. How hot the week had been. How his mom had started working longer hours again at the clinic. And then, out of nowhere, he asked something that made the air between us go still. "Can I ask you something personal?" His voice was quiet, like he was afraid to break whatever fragile thread had just connected us. I turned slightly toward him, surprised but not alarmed. "Of course." He looked down at his hands. "Do you think people ever really get over losing someone they love?" The question landed hard. Like a small, sharp stone dropped into a deep, still well inside me. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. He kept staring at his fingers, avoiding my eyes, maybe afraid of what my silence meant. I mean, he added softly, people always say it gets better. That time heals things. But does it? Or do people just get better at pretending? I swallowed hard. He wasn't just asking a question, he was reaching for something, trying to understand a pain he hadn't figured out how to carry yet. I wanted to give him the right words. Something wise. Something healing. But all I could say, truthfully, was, I don't think we ever fully get over it. I think we just learn how to live differently. He looked at me for the first time then, really looked. And in his eyes, I saw not just curiosity but desperation. The kind you see in someone who's barely holding it together. That moment changed something between us. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I had become a witness to a secret part of him, and whether I wanted to or not, I had just stepped into something far more personal than I had expected. For a long time after Jacob asked me that question, do people ever really get over losing someone they love? I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I sat by my bedroom window, staring at the moonlight spilling over the rooftops. The question echoed in my head, not because it was profound, but because it touched a place I had boarded up years ago. It wasn't just his question anymore. It was ours now. Jacob hadn't said anything else that day. After my quiet answer, he nodded like he understood, or like he at least appreciated the honesty, and left soon after. But I knew that question didn't come from nowhere. Questions like that never do. The next afternoon, he came back. This time, without a bag or a reason. Just walked up to my porch like it was something he'd always done. Mind if I sit? He asked. Please, I said, moving my book aside. We sat for a minute without talking. Then, as if continuing from where we left off, he said, I haven't told anyone this, not even my mom. But sometimes, I feel like I'm disappearing. His voice trembled, but his eyes stayed locked on the horizon, like if he looked at me, he might fall apart. She's trying, you know, he said. My mom. She works so much. She cooks, she cleans, she does all the right things. But it's like she's doing it all with her back turned. Like she's afraid to look at me too long because if she does, she'll see how much I miss him. I didn't have to ask who him was. His father. I want to ask her if she misses him too, he whispered. But I don't want to make her cry. That's when I realized Jacob wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for permission. Permission to feel. To grieve. To say things out loud without being the strong one. And in that moment, I made a choice. I told him about Ethan. My fiancé. I told him how we were supposed to get married that fall. How we had picked out a small vineyard for the ceremony, how he used to hum in the shower, how he always bought two of everything just in case I forgot. And how one rainy evening, he never came home. I didn't cry while telling Jacob. I thought I would. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't telling the story to explain it. I was telling it to connect. And when I finished, Jacob finally looked at me, not like a boy looking at an adult, but like a soul searching for another. He didn't say anything at first. Then he asked quietly, do you ever stop blaming yourself? That was the question that truly changed everything. Because it wasn't about grief anymore. It was about guilt. And that's when I knew we were walking through the same storm, just on different sides of the street. After Jacob asked me if I had ever stopped blaming myself, something inside me broke open. I had spent years burying the guilt under layers of silence, under tidy days and empty nights. I didn't talk about the accident anymore. I didn't let myself think about what could have been done differently. But his question didn't just bring the guilt back, it brought me back to that night. I remember the phone call like it happened 5 minutes ago. Ethan had texted me that he was running late because of the rain. He was always careful, always cautious. But that night, he took a different route to avoid a flooded street. It was a dark, winding road with no streetlights. A truck didn't see him. By the time help arrived, he was already gone. And here's the part one never told anyone. I was the one who suggested that route. He had called me, frustrated, stuck in traffic, and I said, try Fox Ridge. It's usually empty and quicker. Just take it slow. So no, I never stopped blaming myself. Sitting with Jacob that afternoon, I finally said it out loud. My voice was even, but my hands trembled in my lap. Sometimes I wonder if I killed him. Not with my hands, but with my words. Jacob looked horrified, not at me, but at the weight I had been carrying. "That's not your fault," he said quietly. I looked at him and smiled, just a little. "Isn't that what people say to you too?" He nodded, and something between us shifted. Two broken people, whispering confessions into the spaces no one else could reach. We talked for hours. About his father, about how he used to take Jacob fishing. How they would sneak out early before sunrise with a thermos of hot cocoa and sit by the lake in silence. I hated the worms, Jacob laughed softly. But I loved those mornings. And when he said, I didn't even get to say goodbye, I could see the pain rise in his throat like a wave he was trying not to drown in. Neither did I told him. It wasn't just grief we shared, it was the unfinished stories. The goodbyes that never came. The words we would have said if time had allowed it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. But instead of the usual emptiness, I felt something different, connection. For the first time in years, someone knew the worst part of my story and didn't flinch. And I had listened to his, without judgment or fixing. Just listening. Maybe that's what healing begins with, not advice, not answers, but having someone simply hear you when the pain is too big to carry alone. A week passed after that long, emotional afternoon on my porch. Jacob didn't come by again right away, and I didn't push. I had learned enough about grief to know that sometimes people need space after opening up. Still, I found myself thinking about him often, wondering if he was okay, if he'd talked to his mother, if he felt a little lighter after what we shared. Then, on a cloudy Sunday morning, I heard a knock. It was him. "Hey," he said, half smiling. "You got any more of that lemonade?" I let out a small laugh and stepped aside, motioning him in. "Always." He sat at the kitchen table, fiddling with the condensation on his glass. I could tell he had something to say, something that had been building. "I told my mom I missed him," he said quietly. I paused. "And how did she react?" He looked up, eyes heavy. "She cried. But then she said she missed him too. And we actually talked. Really talked. For the first time in months." A swell of warmth rose in my chest. "I'm glad. I think she's been trying so hard to stay strong for me," he added, "that she forgot I wasn't looking for strength, I was looking for honesty." His words echoed my own truth. "I used to do the same thing," I said. Smile when I wanted to scream. Say I was fine when I wasn't. I thought I was protecting everyone from my pain, but all I was really doing was isolating myself. He nodded slowly. "I get that." I leaned forward a little. "You asked me last time if people stop blaming themselves. And I never really answered." He listened closely. "I think sometimes the guilt doesn't go away completely. But it changes. You learn to see the person you lost not as a tragedy, but as a part of who you are now. Their love, their memory, it shapes you. And one day, you stop blaming yourself not because you've forgotten, but because you've forgiven yourself." Jacob blinked hard, his eyes glistening. "Is that how you feel about Ethan?" he asked softly. I hesitated. "I'm learning to. It's taken me years. But talking to you? It's helped more than I can say." His lip trembled slightly, and he looked away, embarrassed. "You helped me too," he whispered. "You really did." We sat there in silence after that, not awkward, but peaceful. Like we were both breathing a little easier. He didn't need answers anymore. What he needed was what we all do in the quiet chaos of grief, someone who understands. That morning didn't end with any dramatic breakthroughs. Just two people, a little less alone than they were before. And sometimes, that's enough. In the days that followed our honest conversation, Jacob began to show up more often, sometimes just to sit in silence, other times to talk about his day or school or what was on his mind. I didn't pry. I simply made space. And gradually, his walls began to crumble. One late afternoon, as the sky turned orange behind the rooftops, Jacob lingered after a casual chat. He stood by the door, backpack slung over his shoulder, then suddenly turned back around. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice barely audible. I looked up, giving him my full attention. "It wasn't just that my dad died," he began, eyes fixed on the floor. "It's how it happened." My chest tightened. I waited. He sat down again, rubbing his palms together nervously. Everyone thinks it was just an accident, that he had a heart attack at work. But that's not the full story. His voice shook now. He had been depressed for a long time. After he lost his job, things got worse. My mom tried to hold everything together, but I know he felt like a burden. I could hear the fear in his tone, the shame that shouldn't have been his to carry. That day, the day he died, Jacob took a shaky breath. He sent me a message. Just said, "I'm sorry, buddy. I love you so much." I didn't know what to do. I thought it was just one of those emotional texts. By the time I got home, it was too late. The words hit me like a wave. He hadn't just lost his father, he had lost him to something so quiet, so hidden, that it left scars no one could see. And worse, he'd been carrying the guilt of not knowing, of not stopping it. I didn't tell anyone, he continued. Not the real reason. I didn't want them to think less of him. Or of me. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "Jacob," I said, "what your father went through wasn't your fault. It wasn't your mother's fault either. Pain like that, it hides. It lies. It convinces people they're alone even when they're not." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face now. I just keep wondering, what if I had replied sooner? What if I had gone home earlier? I squeezed his hand. You did nothing wrong. You loved him. And he knew that. Sometimes the darkness people feel has nothing to do with how much they're loved, and everything to do with how much they're hurting inside. We sat like that for a long time, two souls sharing the weight of a story that was too heavy for one to carry alone. In his brokenness, Jacob had revealed the truth he had been hiding from the world. And in doing so, he took the first real step toward healing. In the days that followed our honest conversation, Jacob began to show up more often, sometimes just to sit in silence, other times to talk about his day or school or what was on his mind. I didn't pry. I simply made space. And gradually, his walls began to crumble. One late afternoon, as the sky turned orange behind the rooftops, Jacob lingered after a casual chat. He stood by the door, backpack slung over his shoulder, then suddenly turned back around. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice barely audible. I looked up, giving him my full attention. "It wasn't just that my dad died," he began, eyes fixed on the floor. "It's how it happened." My chest tightened. I waited. He sat down again, rubbing his palms together nervously. Everyone thinks it was just an accident, that he had a heart attack at work. But that's not the full story. His voice shook now. He had been depressed for a long time. After he lost his job, things got worse. My mom tried to hold everything together, but I know he felt like a burden. I could hear the fear in his tone, the shame that shouldn't have been his to carry. That day, the day he died, Jacob took a shaky breath. He sent me a message. Just said, "I'm sorry, buddy. I love you so much." I didn't know what to do. I thought it was just one of those emotional texts. By the time I got home, it was too late. The words hit me like a wave. He hadn't just lost his father, he had lost him to something so quiet, so hidden, that it left scars no one could see. And worse, he'd been carrying the guilt of not knowing, of not stopping it. I didn't tell anyone, he continued. Not the real reason. I didn't want them to think less of him. Or of me. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "Jacob," I said, "what your father went through wasn't your fault. It wasn't your mother's fault either. Pain like that, it hides. It lies. It convinces people they're alone even when they're not." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face now. I just keep wondering, what if I had replied sooner? What if I had gone home earlier? I squeezed his hand. You did nothing wrong. You loved him. And he knew that. Sometimes the darkness people feel has nothing to do with how much they're loved, and everything to do with how much they're hurting inside. We sat like that for a long time, two souls sharing the weight of a story that was too heavy for one to carry alone. In his brokenness, Jacob had revealed the truth he had been hiding from the world. And in doing so, he took the first real step toward healing. After Jacob shared the truth about his father, something shifted inside him, inside me, and even inside his home. He started coming over not just to talk, but to help. He'd mow my lawn, bring in groceries without asking, or just sit and read on the porch like it was the most natural thing in the world. The silence between us no longer felt heavy. It felt like understanding. But what I noticed more was the subtle transformation in Jacob's eyes. The haunted, sunken look began to fade. He still carried sadness, but now it walked beside hope. One evening, I invited his mother, Mrs. Carter, over for dinner. She was hesitant at first, her face tired from work and worry, but she eventually accepted. The three of us sat at my little kitchen table, eating roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, and for the first time, I saw her smile without forcing it. When Jacob went to the kitchen to grab more tea, she looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." He's talking again. Sleeping. Smiling. You've done more for him than I ever could. I shook my head. No. You gave him a safe home. I just helped him open a door he already had inside him. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I thought I had to be strong for him. But I realize now. I just needed to feel with him. From that point on, our small triangle, Jacob, his mother, and I, started becoming something like a family. No titles, no obligations. Just three people trying to heal together. I introduced them to a local grief counselor who ran a support group for families. At first, they were reluctant. Jacob especially didn't like the idea of talking to strangers about such personal things. But I promised I'd go with them, just once. We sat in that softly lit church basement surrounded by tissues and stories of mothers who lost children, of husbands grieving wives, of teens learning how to live again. And there, in that circle, Jacob finally said the words out loud, "My dad took his own life." No one judged. No one flinched. And as he cried into his mother's arms, I saw something remarkable, a boy who had been silently drowning finally learning how to breathe again. After the meeting, he said, "That felt awful and good at the same time." I smiled. That's healing. It hurts before it helps. Over time, Jacob began volunteering with the group, offering comfort to younger kids who had lost a parent. He'd sit beside them, sometimes without speaking, just offering presence. And somehow, his pain became a light for others. He was becoming what I never thought I could be for someone, a guiding light. And through helping him find his way, I was finally finding mine. The morning of the memorial walk was gray and quiet, the kind of soft, overcast day where everything feels calm and suspended. It had been 6 months since Jacob first sat on my porch and asked that question that opened every door we'd been afraid to face. Now, here we were, Jacob, his mother, and I, standing among a crowd of families gathered for the annual community event honoring loved ones lost too soon. Jacob wore his father's old baseball cap. His mom clutched a small framed photo of the three of them at a lake, all smiles, frozen in happier times. And I carried a single white lily for Ethan. We walked slowly through the park trails, surrounded by people who understood grief, not the loud kind, but the quiet ache that lingers in the background of life. Jacob stayed close, not saying much. But I noticed how he occasionally looked around at the others, not with fear anymore, but with empathy. He saw their pain, and instead of withdrawing, he leaned into it. He had grown. After the walk, there was a small gathering. A makeshift stage. People were invited to come forward and share memories or names. I never thought Jacob would step up, but he did. He walked to the microphone, his fingers trembling slightly. He cleared his throat, eyes focused on the crowd, then said, "My name is Jacob. I lost my dad last year." He was funny. Quiet. He loved to fish and make pancakes on Sundays. And he loved me. He paused, eyes shining but steady. I didn't know how to talk about it for a long time. I thought, if I told the truth, it would hurt more. But I've learned that the truth doesn't hurt as much as silence does. I miss him every day. And I'm learning that's okay. There was quiet applause, not loud, but real. His mother reached for his hand. I felt a deep warmth in my chest. Afterward, we sat on a bench watching the balloons rise into the sky, one for each name read aloud. As they floated upward, I whispered Ethan's name. Jacob glanced at me and said, "You think they hear us?" I nodded. I like to think they never really left. He smiled gently. I hope so. We didn't need to say more. That evening, back at home, we shared dinner again, me, Jacob, and his mom. There was laughter at the table now, light teasing, stories about Ethan and Jacob's dad. Grief still lived with us, but it no longer ruled us. It had softened, settled into something we carried with love instead of fear. Looking at Jacob, I saw someone who had faced the darkest part of himself and come out not unscarred, but stronger. And I realized I had too. The boy who had once asked me something deeply personal had given me something just as powerful in return, a second chance at connection. And maybe, just maybe, that's how healing happens. Together. 32.